Hello everyone, this is John Galt speaking, here with part 3, I guess we're on part 3, where we're going through the process of creating a multiplayer first-person shooter game from ground zero. So in this video here, I would like to try to get the character animated, since we got him moving around, and also try to go ahead and get the crosshair put in the screen, okay? So let's go ahead and open up the project here. This might end up being a little bit shorter video than the others because I plan on stopping after we get the character animated and that crosshair put on with a little bit of explanation as to what we're doing here and why. Okay, so we're picking right up where we left off in the last video, and we have the character able to move around and jump, and that's essentially the extent of what we did. So the way that we have this set up, we're going to have to use two animation blueprints. One animation blueprint is going to control the character's third person only mesh and the lower torso of the character. The other animation blueprint is strictly going to be for the first person view only. Okay, and so as we build this thing, we're going to have to touch both of those animation blueprints as we go through here, adding things like weapon firing animations, reloading animations. And the reason that, we're going to do this way is because it allows for more flexibility when it comes to the look and feel of your characters, as well as your weaponry and all that stuff that you put on there. So a lot of people go the route of sticking the camera on the head, and they call that true first-person view, but there's a lot of drawbacks to that that we'll talk about as we build this character. Okay, so I think it was in the last video, we went ahead and created an animation blueprint, and it's just a generic animation blueprint. So it doesn't really matter which one we start with, whether we start with the first person animation blueprint or the third person animation blueprint. We're going to have to do them both. Okay. So I guess we'll just go ahead and open up this one here, and we're going to start getting this done. Now, one thing too here that's kind of odd to me, your preview windows, remember the last mesh that you opened. That's why when we look at this character here, we're only seeing the lower torso. So apparently at some point I opened that one last. So to correct that, all we have to do is go open the full body mesh of this character here, and then that will be the one that we use as our preview. So by just simply opening this one, let's go ahead and hit save. See how it dirtied up the skeleton? Let's just go ahead and hit the save button too. This engine's a little janky sometimes, and it still didn't save it, so let's do a save all. And now when we open up this animation blueprint, you can see that the preview is the full character. Now, an animation blueprint consists of two different graphs, really. So this graph is what's called the, let me just go ahead and close both of these in case you end up doing that by accident. I remember, once upon a time when I did that, I thought I was in trouble because I didn't know how to reopen them. So if you don't have any of them open, right here's where your graphs are. So as I said, a animation blueprint consists of two graphs by default. You have what's called an event graph, which is here, and you also have what's called an anim graph. These two things working in conjunction together is what allows you to animate your character. Okay, so essentially what happens is, in the event graph is where you put logic to monitor things about your character that you use to drive the animation of your character. Things like, is the character in the air? What speed is the character going? What direction is the character going? And then in the anim graph, this is where you put all your blend spaces and your animation montages and all that stuff to blend all those things together that end up with the final animation pose. So In the animation graph, we're going to right click and we're going to type state, and we're going to create a state machine. Okay, now inside a state machine, this is essentially a group of animation states, right? That's why it's called a state machine. And we're just going to call this locomotion. And we'll go ahead and plug this straight in to our final animation pose and compile that and save it. Now, inside the animation state, by double clicking, this is where you put your individual states. So the first state that we're going to have, we're going to pull out of that, let go, and just add a state. And we're going to call this ground underscore movement. So this is going to be our basic ground movement of the character, meaning forward, backward, left, right, and all that stuff. So inside this state here, if you double click, this is where you put in your animations and you plug them into here. The problem is we don't have what's called a blend space that we're going to use to plug into this in here. We need what's called a blend space. And a blend space, let's just go ahead and compile this and save it. A blend space is a group of animations that are blended together via a variable-driven operation. So inside this animation starter pack folder, we're going to create a new folder, and we're going to call this blend. Actually, let's just prefix this with BS, which stands for blend space. And let's call this ground. Actually, let's call this idle walk. Idle underscore walk. Actually, you know what? This actually just needs to be called, I'm totally doing this wrong. So let's select that folder and hit F2 and call this blend spaces. Wow. So this is the folder we'll put all of our blend spaces in. So now we're going to create the blend space. It's too early in the morning for this stuff. So you right click and you go to animation, and this is all the different assets you can create that are in relation to animation. So when we look at the blend spaces here, you can see that we have two selections. One of them is designated as 1D, which stands for one directional or one dimensional. That means you only can input one value to drive the animation. Well, in this project, we're making a character that has strafing movements, meaning he can go forward, backward, left, right. But the character is always going to be facing forward, right? Because this is a shooter game, and you want your character to always face forward towards your crosshair with the gun facing forward so you can shoot at what's coming at you. So in that case, we're going to make just a blend space, which is a 2D blend space. And it asks you which skeleton, since we only have the one skeleton in here, we were going to pick that, and this is the one we're going to call BS underscore idle underscore walk. And we'll go ahead and open this up here. So this is the blend space, a 2D blend space. And this is where you plug in all your animations that you want this character to blend between based on parameters that you define. So in this case, if you look right here for the axis settings, we have two. A 1D blend space will only give you the option of having one axis. So what we're going to use here is we're going to be using the direction the character is moving as one of these values, and the direction will be -180 to +180. And for now, we're just going to leave the grid divisions at 4, and we'll talk about that here later in this series. The vertical axis, this is going to be what speed the character is moving, and by default, the movement of this character is 600. So we're just going to go ahead and put 600 in here as that. And if you want to know how I know that, if you remember in the character blueprint here, when we were talking about this character movement component, if you come over here and look, there is a setting over here called max walk speed right here. That is the speed the character moves. And that's why I said the default is 600. This will have to be tweaked based on the play rate of your animations, right? So we'll have to probably toggle back and forth between the blend space and this in order to tweak them in to get them so that the character moves exactly the way that he's supposed to and minimize the foot sliding of the character. Okay? Okay. So now when we put those values in here, you're going to notice that now it's got speed and it's got direction. So the speed is the up-down axis and the direction is the left-right axis. So we already have the animations in here that we're going to be using. And it's going to be the iron sights animation. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is here shortly. So when you're building a first-person game, your animations actually matter, right? Because you got to remember, what is the view the character is going to be looking through? Well, he's going to be looking from his face, essentially, which means if you try to use animations where the weapon is held lower, you're going to have an issue because your camera is going to be looking through the head, basically the eyes of the character, which means he won't be able to see his weapon if he's holding it down at his hip in first person view. So the reason we're using these iron sights animations is because they're held up, the arms and stuff are held up towards the head of the character, which means we'll be able to see the arms, and then eventually when we put the weapon in the character's hand, we'll be able to see it. This is one of the reasons why, you know, it's really easier to make it this way, because once you get your first person view set up correctly with the animations and everything, you really don't have to mess with it anymore. Regardless of what weapon you're holding, I mean, you might have a pistol, but you're not going to be having like rocket launcher animations that are held down at your hip and that kind of stuff. You're just not. Because even if you did use them, well, you wouldn't be able to see them anyway. Right? So what would be the point at that point of using those kinds of animations if you can't even see them anyway? Okay? Okay. So let's get the idle iron sights animation, and that's what we're going to populate the bottom of this graph with. So right here is idle rifle iron sights. So that's going to be across the bottom of this entire blend space. And then we need to put the animation in that's going to be playing whenever the character is moving forward at his full speed, which will be walk forward rifle iron sights. And we're going to use walk left rifle iron sights here. And we're going to use walk right rifle iron sights here. And then in these corners, we're going to be putting, that's where the backwards animation will go. Walk backward. And then if you hold down your left shift button and click in the graph, and you start moving this, you can see how this works. So when the character's at idle, he's just going to be sitting here like this. Then when the character starts picking up speed, you see how it gradually starts blending. And then when you get to the full speed, he's going full speed. And then if you change your direction, you'll see that he'll start going that way. And if you go to the right, he'll go that way. And if you go straight backwards, pressing the S key, he's going to do this. Right? Now, we may have to try to create some animations to fill in some of the gaps, but essentially that's how the character is going to move. We'll do sprint later. We just need to get the basic movement of this character going. Okay? All right, and that's essentially what a blend space is. I would suggest anybody that does this to come over here and fiddle with some of these things, right? Because you can change the type of blending that's done. You can also put in a smoother blending so the character doesn't just instantly jump into the animation. But that's really beyond the scope of this. But there's lots of things over here you can tinker with to change the way, the behavior of the way that the blending of this character happens inside this blend space. Okay? Lots of tweaking. We're not going to be tweaking levers in this video because we've got a lot of ground to cover. And if we get bogged down into the details of spending an hour tweaking the movement of the character, that's all we're ever going to get done. Okay, so now that we have that blend space in the animation blueprint, back inside the state machine, inside the ground movement state, you know what? We ought to change this to idle walk, right? Because that's what we named the blend space. So let's just go ahead and call it idle walk. Now we actually go into the asset browser here and we can look for that blend space we created, which would be prefixed with BS. And right here it is. You just drag that into your graph and you plug it up. The problem is that it needs some values to drive this. So let's go ahead and compile and save this, and you'll see that the character is in idle. And that's because it's reading that the speed of the character is 0 and the direction of the character is 0, which means he's idle. So we're going to have to take into the event graph and create some logic in there to create the monitoring of the direction the character is moving and the monitoring of the speed at which the character is moving. So we're going to use this right here called try pawn. Try on. Oh, great! It ain't showing up. Get on. There it is. So if you type get pawn, you're going to see that there's a function in here called try get pawn owner. So these things here, let's go ahead and talk about these because these are a little bit mysterious as to how you get familiar with finding what you need. Well, honestly, I'm just going to straight up say that really you should right click and just start going through some of these things and looking at them. And as you get familiar with the engine, you will realize that there are certain nodes in here that you use a lot more than others. And that's how I can remember these, is because really I've just built so many things that I just remember them. But everything that you see me use is things that are available in here in one of these categories in some way, shape, or form. And so there's really no way to understand that other than you just get more familiar with this as you go. Okay, so try get pawn owner. Here's another thing that we'll talk about briefly here that's a little bit mysterious. How do you know what to plug into the target? Well, if you hover over the pin of any node, it doesn't matter which one it is, it tells you what it's asking for. So you can see that it says target and it's asking for an anim instance reference. This animation blueprint happens to be an anim instance reference, which is why by default it says self in here. Self means get a reference to whatever blueprint you're in. So in this case, the target it's asking for is an anim instance, and we are already in an anim instance, which means it can use self as a reference, and that's exactly what it's looking for. And also, if you look at what it returns, if you do the same thing and hover over this value, it tells you what it returns. In this case, it returns a pawn reference. Well, guess what our character happens to be? It's a pawn. And from that pawn, basically what this means here is that it's giving you a reference to your character blueprint. Your character blueprint is what contains all that information that we're needing, which means this is going to be able to tell us what the speed of the characters is. It's also going to be able to tell us what direction the character is moving. And that's why in the animation blueprint, we're getting a reference to our character. Now from this pawn, try get pawn owner, there's one more step that we have to do here, which is cast to the specific blueprint that we're looking for. In this case, it's the character master blueprint. The character master blueprint is the blueprint that we're using to create our character. Everything that we'll need to reference is going to be contained in this character master reference, meaning what weapon we're going to be using, what the speed of the character is, what the direction of the character is the character crouching, are you in the air, are you dead? All that is going to come from, at some point, this character blueprint. So right here in the animation blueprint, we're going to do a cast to the master. And this is another reason why your naming conventions kind of matter, because it makes it easier to remember what you're needing to cast to. Now, when we do this and plug this up here, this pin right here contains every single bit of data that is going to be on that character's blueprint. Everything. Okay? And so a TLDR version of what does a cast node even do? Well, basically it's saying here, try to get the pawn owner of this blueprint, this animation blueprint, and cast to that blueprint. This is a validation here saying if we try to get the pawn owner and we cast to that character master blueprint, if we poke that blueprint on the shoulder and say, excuse me, are you a character master blueprint? If it says, yes, I am, in fact, a character master blueprint, that means this pin right here fires. If it's not a character master blueprint, that means that this pin fires, cast failed. So this is a validation, as well as a way to get a direct reference to the specific blueprint that you're trying to get a reference to. So we're going to be accessing this a lot. So another thing we're going to do is an is valid. There is a macro in here called is valid that you generally use a lot. And it is exactly what it says it is. I want to know if this character master blueprint is valid, meaning does it exist? So we're trying to get a reference to the pawn. We're casting to ask, hey, are you in fact our character master blueprint? If you are you valid? Meaning, do you exist in the world, in the game world? And then if that's true, is valid fires. And if it's not true, is not valid fires. And we're going to take this and promote this to a variable. And we're going to store this out of is valid. We're going to store this forevermore so that we don't ever have to do this casting and validation ever again. We're going to store a reference to that variable here so that when we script in all the logic we're going to be using to make this animation blueprint, we will never have to cast our character again, ever, because we're storing it right here. So I'm going to actually call this BP character master REF, which is reference. That means forevermore, if we need anything from our character, any values, we can just take and get it from this variable right here and never have to cast to it again. So I'm going to hold down the S key on the keyboard and left click to put a sequence node here. Think of these sequence nodes as a power strip that you plug into your outlet. Basically, you take one power outlet and you can generate many more. That's all a sequence does. You see, you can keep adding pins to this, and it's literally like a power strip you plug in for your computer. That gives you the same thing as that gives you, which gives you the same as the rest of them. It's just a way to organize things so that you can keep track of them better. So we're going to bring in this character master reference and get it. And what I want to know here is the speed at which the character is moving. So to get the speed, it's not called speed, oddly enough. So if you were to pull out of here and type speed, I guess it says you can get the max speed, but that's to set the max speed of the character. What you really need is what's called velocity. Get velocity. See it right here? The velocity of the character contains more than one single speed. This contains all the direction speed, meaning forward, backward, left, right, up, and down. So since we're needing the speed of the character, we only need the directional speed. We don't need the speed he's moving up in the air and down in the air. So we're going to right click this and split it apart. Once again, we need the forward, backward, and the left and the right, but we do not need the up down. Remember, Z in this engine is up down. So what we're going to do now is, since we broke that apart, we're going to make a vector, make vector, and we're going to put it back together. But what we're going to do is omit the up down velocity. So since we broke this apart, now we can get specific about which velocity we want. We don't want the up down. All we need is the forward, backward, left, and right. Then the length of that is the actual speed of the character. That right there is the speed the character is moving. Okay. And so if we right click this, promote it to a variable, this can become speed. And I'm going to take this off of the VIN1 pin and plug this in here. Double click the line and that will make what's called a reroute node. And really these things are really just to organize things. Okay? Now we also need the direction the character is moving. So remember, our blend space, we need the speed of the character and the direction. So we're going to take the same character master. Actually, let's right click here and type calculate direction. So there's a function pre-created called calculate direction. And once again, if you hover over these pins, it tells you what it needs, right? So the anim instance, well, this is the anim instance. It needs the velocity of the character. Well, hey, guess what? This is the velocity of the character. And it also needs the base rotation of the character. So from our character reference, if we was to pull out of this and type get actor rotation, that is the rotation, the base rotation of the character. And now we can take this and just plug this in here and connect those together, which you could just hit this pin and you could plug that in that way, right? You could do that too. It doesn't matter. And if you hold down the Alt key and click, that's how you unhook an execution pin. So let's just go ahead and leave it like that. But you could just as easily do this, and that would be fine. It just depends on how organized you want these graphs to be. Now, the reason that we didn't use the VIN0 pin is because eventually we're going to be doing some other things up here, and I like to keep these things that we'll be doing later, I like to keep them separate from everything else. Okay? All right. And so if we right-click this return value and promote that to a variable, this is actually the direction of the character. And that is the only two values that we need to drive that blend space at the moment. So back inside the anim graph, remember where we are here. It gets easy to get lost in here. We're inside the anim graph, right? You can double click it here and open it if it's closed. Inside the locomotion state machine, inside the idle walk state, this is where we're going to be plugging in the speed that we just monitored and the direction of this character. And now, when we spawn in, we're still not going to be animated yet because we haven't told the meshes which ones to use this yet. So we're not animated. We've created the assets, but now we got to go into the character master blueprint and plug in inside this one here. Over here, once you select the mesh of the character, you plug it in right here. It says animation mode, and right here it says use animation blueprint. This is the animation blueprint that we just created. So we called that APB character master. The torso of this is going to also use that exact same animation blueprint. And for now, we can go ahead and actually plug that same animation blueprint into the arms only mesh. And now, when we spawn in here, we actually now have an animated character. Now, this is what I was talking about. We're going to have a lot of tweaking to do here. You can see how fast this character is moving, and he looks like he's kind of sliding on the ground. So you could do one of two things here. Either you could speed up the play rate of the animation, or you could slow down the movement speed of the character. Now, since we're going to be implementing sprint, I think we'll just go ahead and slow the character's speed down. So what we're going to do is in the character animation, or in the character master blueprint, let's go into that character movement component and find the max walk speed. And let's slow this down to something like, let's try 270, which that's probably still too much, but let's try that. Now, here's the part that really stinks about this. Since we changed this value here, we also have to go inside this blend space and change this axis here. Remember how we put this in? We need to change that to 270 as well. Now let's go have a look and see if that gets our movement a little bit better. So you can see he ain't slip sliding as much, but it still looks like he's a little bit too fast. So let's slow that down a little bit more. Let's go to the blend space first, and let's say 180. And then in the character movement component, let's slow this down to 180 as well. Takes a little bit of tweaking to get this in, but we'll just try to get it ballpark close for now because we got lots of stuff to do. And basically, I'm just looking on the right-hand screen over there to see if it looks like he's moonwalking. And that looks to be a little bit better. So I think we're just going to roll with that for now. So now we can start tweaking in our view. So when we pivot down, you can see now we don't have a replicated aim offset yet. That we're going to do that a little bit later. But you can see that in the first person view, when I pivot this camera up and down, it's moving like it ought to. This is why we're going to have to split this into two separate animation blueprints. The first person view doesn't need an aim offset, but the third person view is going to have an aim offset. Okay. So we need to move our camera and our arms forward so that when we look down, we're not looking inside our chest. Now, another thing too, and I don't want to spend a whole ton of time on this, is that we should be doing this tweak in full screen, not this screen. Okay, so we're going to come up here temporarily and change this back to one player. And we're going to say selected viewport. And then we're going to hit F11 so that we can go full screen. So this is where we need to be doing this tweak at. But you know, before we do this tweak, what we really should do, see, because all these things is connected together. What are we missing here that's a very important part of a first-person shooter game? We're missing the crosshair. So the crosshair is a very important part of a shooter game in the fact that the crosshair is going to be placed in the center of the screen, like right dead smack in the center of the screen. Everything else in a shooter game needs to point to the dead center of the screen. And that's how we get really accurate weaponry and our firing logic. And we tell, you know, the weapon where to shoot toward. We tell the projectiles where to fly toward. All that is based on the dead center of the screen. That is a fixed point in space in a 3D environment that we can always get to be consistently the same in the exact center of the screen. So what we're actually going to do before we do any more tweaking is get that crosshair in the center of the screen, because everything else has to line up with that crosshair, right? So we're going to hit F11 and then escape. Now I do my crosshairs and my display on the character screen. I do this a specific way for a specific reason. So we're going to be creating a new blueprint that we currently don't have, which is called a HUD. So we're going to right click in here where our character's at, and we're going to create a blueprint class, and we're going to do underneath all classes here, and we're going to type HUD. And what we want here is this HUD blueprint. So once you select it here, you hit select, and we're going to call this HUD for HUD, and the name of the project, right? So this is going to be MP underscore FPS. Now, if you remember, the game mode is a blueprint that we can use to designate specific blueprints that the character is intended to use. So in the blueprints folder, this game mode, if we open this back up, this is where we can define all those custom blueprints. So you can see that there is a slot here for the HUD. So we are going to hit this, and we're going to tell it to use the HUD that we just created, HUD MP FPS. Compile that and save it. Now we're going to create 2 widgets. Okay, and we're just going to go ahead and put these in here for now, and we'll have to organize this project a little bit later because we're going to be getting a lot of different blueprints in here. But for now, we're going to create what's called a widget. So if you right click and go underneath user interface, we have what's called widget blueprints. We're going to create one, and we're going to call this BPW for blueprint widget underscore, and we're going to call this container. And after we do that, we're going to create another widget blueprint, and we're going to call this one BPW Crosshair. Okay, and we're going to start in reverse order here, getting all these things hooked up. So the crosshair is literally going to be the crosshair that we're going to use, at least for now. So to do that, the crosshair, if you remember when we brought it out of the first person, it's an image, it's a picture. So what we're going to do is over here, we're going to drag in an image here. And then this is to indicate where it's anchored at. And right now it needs to be in the center right here. Now, this is a little funky, and once again, I'm not very good at UI, so you'll just have to forgive me for this. We're going to hit this reset to default. We're going to change the size of this to 32 by 32. And then we're going to set the alignment to 0.5 by 0.5. And that should make it where that image is directly in the center of our screen. Now we need to put in the picture of the crosshair, because right now it's just a white dot. Now you could leave it that way and use a white dot, but since we have a crosshair image, we're going to go ahead and underneath the brush, we're going to hit this drop down here, and we're going to select an image, and maybe this will work, hopefully. Under the textures, we're going to select this default crosshair. See, and that right there, that's not correct, right? Like, that is literally not going to work. It does this to me all the time, and I don't really know why it does this. But what we're going to have to do is restore this down so that we can do this. I don't know why it does this. It might just be a bug. I don't know. But we need to go to that image here, select it, and then we can make this big again. And we just need to hit this little arrow that says use selected asset in the content browser. So we selected it in the content browser, and if we hit this button, it'll automatically put it in here. I don't know why it acts so crazy like that. And let's go ahead and change the size to 32 by 32. We're going to double the size of the crosshair. It's also kind of important to name these things. So instead of this just being called generic image, we're going to call this crosshair underscore img, so that if we ever need to know that, we can actually know the name of it and not just some generic name. Okay. So that should be enough to get the crosshair widget done. That's really all we need for now. So when we spawn in here, we still don't have it, right? We still don't have the crosshair. Even though we have the HUD, we don't have the crosshair. So I'm going to try to explain this, and hopefully this will make sense. Hopefully. So we need to take the crosshair that we made and put it inside this container widget. So we're going to open up the container widget, and if you scroll over here, you have this category called user created. This is widgets that we make. And you can see that widget we just created called crosshair shows up right here. And if we drag that over here and let it go, you can see that our crosshair is in here. We need to make sure that this is in the center of the screen. So we anchor this to the center. Zero these values out, set this to 32 by 32, which is the size we set it to. Our alignment needs to be 0.5 by 0.5. And that should now have that crosshair right smack in the center of the screen. It's important. If you want to have accurate weapons, you got to start out with an accurate crosshair. Got to be in the center of the screen, and then everything else will point and shoot towards that. Okay? So now that we did that, we still don't have the crosshair. So now we have to go inside the HUD and open full blueprint editor, and we have to actually create the widget and attach it to the screen of the character. So on event begin play, meaning when this HUD builds into the world, we're going to do what's called create widget, right? And that is going to be plugged in here. And this is something too that we should probably do a has authority here. Switch has authority. And we can probably do this. We might have to come back and mess with this a little bit, because really the HUD is something that only the client needs to know and care about. But for now, let's just go ahead and do it this way, and we might come back and change this to the remote. Testing. So this is the class. This is asking you, which widget do you want me to create? In this case, you might think it's the crosshair, but it ain't. It's the container widget. And if you hover over this pin, it says it needs a player controller reference the owning player controller. So out of this, if you pull out of this and type owning, you can see that it says get owning player, and there's two in here. And they both essentially say the exact same thing. Target is widget, target is user widget. I guess either one of those will be fine. And then after you do that, you might want to store this in a variable. So let's go ahead and promote this to a variable. And let's call this W underscore container. Ref. So that's our container reference. Yeah, so that's wrong. So let's try this again. Owning. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. This is asking for the player controller. I guess it's this one then. And it's still giving an error. Wait a minute. That's a widget. What is this asking for again? Why is this being such a pain in the butt? Player controller reference owning player. So player controller. No, we need the owning player controller. So why is this being such a punk? Neither one of these can only be used inside of a widget. So let's just not pull out of that and type owning. That ain't it either. See, in multiplayer, you got to be careful when you do this because this has to be specific, right? You can't do generic stuff when you're doing multiplayer. Otherwise, it goofs the logic up. So this is important. And for whatever reason, I'm forgetting what this is. So this ain't it, right? This is literally not it. I know which one it is. I just can't remember. It ain't that, right? Like I know it ain't that. That ain't it. It ain't that. I might actually have to go reference a project because I don't remember. See, even I don't remember everything, guys. But I do know that you have to get this right. So let me type own. Maybe I can undo context sensitive and find it. Get owning actor. Get owning player controller. Get owning pawn. Get owning player controller. Is it really this? Nope. It ain't that. We shouldn't have to have another reference in here. So let me try this again. And then if I get stuck here, we're just going to have to go reference it. Own. Oh, why can I not remember? Get owning player controller. I think it might be that one. Nope. All right, we're going to go reference another project because I don't want to have to sit here ho-hawing and humming for an hour. So quickly here, let's go look at one that works. Because once again, this has to be right, okay? So I don't want to give you guys wrong information. So we're going to create a simple. Let's see. I didn't put health on those guys, so no. This is going to have to be MP multiplayer FPS basic. So let's just go ahead and create this project real quick because this is driving me nuts, and I don't want. I've already wasted too much time on this, so let's go have a look, and you'll see that it's a very. See, this is why I always keep reference projects. Even I can't remember every single little thing. So this is just something that you learn as you go. So if we go into this project here and we look at the HUD, let's go see what this magical node is called. Get owning player controller. That's what I was using and it wasn't working. So why, oh why was that being a thing? It's because, you want to know why? It's because we're in the game mode. Oops. So scratch all this, right? Actually, you know what? Let's just Control X to cut that out of here. And it would be helpful if I was actually in the right blueprint, which is the HUD. In the event graph of the HUD. Wow, don't I feel like a schmo? And we'll paste this in here. And then compile this and save it. And right click this variable and say create variable. And now let's go back into the game mode and let's just delete the event begin play. And we're also going to go ahead and delete the container ref. So see there, everybody makes mistakes. It's your ability to be able to realize the mistake and correct it. Right? So that right there is literally why it was not working. So if I was to take now and pull out of this and type owning, now you can see that it has right here, get owning player controller. That is exactly what we need. See? Unfortunately, I made a boo-boo. Okay, so we're doing the same thing, right? So we're creating we're getting the owning player controller, and we're creating a widget. We're storing that widget in a reference for later use. And then after that, we just simply need to add to viewport. And that will be what makes it actually display on the screen. So now you can see that there's the crosshair right dead smack in the center of the screen. And you know what? I actually think I want that to be a little bit bigger. So let's go ahead and make that a little bit bigger. So back in the blueprints here, let's go into the crosshair first, select the image, and let's actually make that 64 by 64. And we need to change that in one more place, which is in the container. We need to change this to 64 by 64. I just want that to be a little bit bigger so that we can see it better. And it don't look like it did it. So let's go back and look and see why. Why didn't this do it? So 32 by 30. Oh, that's because that needs to be 64 by 64. So we actually have to change that in 3 places. In the crosshair widget, we change it here, and we change it here. And in the container widget, we just have to change it here. So that should be more about what I want. There we go. I want it to be big so that we can see it really well. Okay, so we're almost done here. This video actually ended up being a little bit longer than I thought. So now what we need to do is try to line all these things up. Now, we don't have a weapon in the hands of the character just yet, but we know that it's going to need to point at that crosshair. So in the character blueprint, in here, let's go ahead and try to line this up a little bit. So you see that we need the arms to come to the left, right? Not the camera. We need the arms to come to the left so that the arms are pointed more towards that crosshair. So in the viewport, if we get behind this character here and we select the arms only, let's go ahead and turn off snaps, right? So let's click this button here. And let's move them over to the left a little bit. And I don't want to sit here all day tweaking with this, but maybe just a little bit more. So select the arms and let's move them a little bit more. And OCD is killing me, right? So let's move it just a tad more. There, that's going to be pretty good. Okay, now we need to deal with when we look down. So we need to bring the camera, not just the arms, we need to bring the camera and everything forward, right? So if we select the FP cam and we bring this forward, I don't know exactly how far we're going to have to go, but we want to make it where when we look down, it looks correct, right? So see there, that's still not good enough. So let's move it forward a little more. Yep, still not quite enough. So let's go just a little bit more. There we go. I mean, we might want to go just a tad more. Yeah, let's just go ahead and do just a tad more. Okay, now let's go F11 to go full screen and make sure it still looks okay this way. You know what? That crosshair may end up being too big, but we're not going to fool with that. Once again, I don't want to get lost in, you know, all these little tweaks and everything that needs to be made. Okay, so I think we're going to be okay with that, and I think that's where we're going to end the video at here. And then we'll come back in the next video, and we're still going to have to do some animation stuff, right? Because we're going to have to get the third person aim offset implemented, so when we pivot up and down, both players can see it. Because right now, if we go back to 2 players, new editor windows, when we're pivoting, it's okay for us, but that person looking at us, he also needs to see the character pivot up and down, and that's going to take an aim offset to do. So we will do that. And there's still more tweaking to do. Now, one thing too that I want to point out here is we're going to have a big clipping issue that we're going to have to deal with. So when I come over here to this wall, look at that. I can clip my arms and everything right into the wall. Now, why is this? We'll talk about this briefly before we end the video. The only collision that you have is what's contained inside this capsule. And as you can see here, these arms are not inside this capsule. So we're going to have to figure out a way to deal with that so that these arms and camera don't clip into objects. So there's a couple different ways to deal with that, and we'll pick one, and that's what we'll use to deal with it. But just know that that's currently a thing. Okay? All right, and so with that, I'm going to end this video here. We'll pick up in the next video. We'll get the jump implemented. See, there's no jump animation yet either. So that's something that we're going to have to implement too. And we'll finish tweaking up the animation part. And then that's where we'll end that video. And then we'll move into, you know, how we're going to set the weapons and stuff up on this character. So with that, this is John Galt, and we will see you guys in the next video. Have a good one, fellows.